I often tell the apprentices where I work that they can learn from everybody and they should never think that they're smarter than other people just because of their job or what they believe. I've learned a lot of things from the floor sweeper and the janitor at work that I needed to know about things that I do. You can learn from everybody, and that falls right into hunting too. And even if you don't care for hunting a certain way, or maybe don't like a certain style of hunting, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be open-minded to hearing about it. Like for instance, a recent conversation with a guy about bait hunting. He was a big bait hunter, big proponent of hunting over bait. And he's from an area where a lot of people hunt over bait. It's pretty common practice. You wouldn't think you could learn a lot from a guy like that. But listening to his stories, I realized you could learn a little bit about how deer come in when they sense there could be danger, how they come in when they're worried, whether or not they look in trees. It was kind of intriguing listening to him talk about the details of his hunts. And in this week's hunt, we're going to talk with somebody who has a lot of experience with shooting big bucks. This person's a tracker. And a tracker learns a lot about giant bucks by following them through the woods and seeing where they go. Todd Havel's been a friend of mine for many years. He's on my website. He doesn't come on as often anymore, but he still comes on. And he posts tactical information about how to track deer. And he's got his own page on Facebook that keeps him real busy. We'll post a link to that in the video description and a link to his YouTube page so you can check it out. What we have this week is an interview with him that's very old. This interview actually goes back, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago, maybe even more. I'm not real sure, but Todd's turning a little gray now. He's getting a little older. In this video, he's got a black beard. But there's going over the footage and listening to the interview that for whatever reason never ended up getting used until now. I realized there's really a gem there. He really gives some good content about what he learned about whitetails through tracking. I think you're going to enjoy this. This is a pretty cool video. So come along, let's go check Todd out and see what he's got to say.
A lot of times I think the ones you're successful on are the ones that make those mistakes, that something happened unusual where they didn't pick the best spot to be. And in those cases, you get lucky. You get lucky. I took one 2 years ago in Minnesota. I watched where he crossed several roads to try to cut down the distance. And when I did get on him, he was in wide open hardwood. So I just bared down and went fast because I figured there's no way he's going to bed here. It's just wide open. And I don't think I went 500 yards. Came down through a little valley and up the other side, and I froze right in my tracks because he was laying right in front of me, right in the middle of the open hardwoods underneath a cedar tree. I came so fast and up that ridge so fast that he never even saw me, and he was actually facing my way. He was facing his backtrack. But he never even saw me, and I just froze, and I had time to take photos of him, and finally I rousted him. He wasn't big enough to shoot. I let him go. So the bedding situation you're talking about is more of a feed and bedded type situation, and the tracking occurs more during the rut, and that's a little bit different situation. I had one come in, make a loop around, and come back across his track, go up to a high point, and lay down. And while I saw where the tracks crossed and thought, boy, that's another nice buck as well, and sorted it out and went on the one I was on, I came back around, and what a fool I felt when I crossed the same track and went another 40 yards, and there was his bed. Well, in most cases, you're going to take the buck on the first time you encounter him. That's going to be I would say 95% of the time you're going to take that deer the first time you encounter him. So up until that point, you're just tracking a deer that's on his normal pattern, you know, and whoever got him there or why ever he was there for whatever reason.
Okay.
In most cases, it's looking for does, I would imagine, during the rut. Once you got him up and going, then it's a tough ball game. Then it's a lot tougher.
I tracked this buck, and he was bedded here. Came all the way along that swamp edge feeding, so I knew he was gonna bed up. And then came and he laid up here, but he was already gone when I got here. Then he moved up and fed again and bedded down about 60 yards from here, and I kicked him up, and I just couldn't get the bead on him as he was running through the swamp. So I'm going to give him a little time, and I'm going to go after him again. I still have 2 hours left. Maybe we can still make it happen.
One thing I do is try to find out where the deer is. If I cut a track crossing a road, I may not get on him right away. I may go down and check if he crossed another road or a logging road to try to cut down the distance I have to walk. It's a lot easier to drive than it is to walk. So to save energy, I like to see if he came out of a section before I go in after him. And it saves a lot of legwork, and it makes it much easier. You know where he is. You know how, you may even know how far away he is and how hard to push the track. The type of snow I like is fresh snow. 3 inches or less is nice. 2 to 3 inches, you can see a very good impression.
Here's the track I'm going to take. Nice and wide, Bigfoot. I'm excited about this one. Fresh snow. Last night. This track has no snow in it whatsoever. It had to be sometime after midnight probably. And with this section that he's in, I don't believe he's more than a mile away from me right now. So I feel my chances are pretty good at least to catch up to him. Let's go see where he's at.
If it's soft, it's nice for that day. If it freezes at night, then it gets really crunchy. So a fresh, more of a soft snow, you can get a really nice impression of the track. You can really see detail then. That's the best.
This is the track I'm going to take. It's a nice width. He's got a nice width between left and right. And he appears to be following a doe. And it is very fresh track. So I've got some things in my favor. And I'm going to grab this track and run it for a while and see what things look like. I don't think they're too far ahead of me right now. So with any luck, I'll catch up to them within an hour or so. See you then.
Fresh snow is the best from the standpoint of the more days go by, the more other tracks get tracked on top of it, and that makes it more difficult. So you spend more time trying to sort out your track and trying to age the track. So it makes it a lot tougher, but it can be done. You know, you can take. Well, the buck I killed last year was on snow that was about 4 days old. Okay. I've tracked 3 different states. I started out in Wisconsin, the Northwoods, the thick, heavy, thick cover. I also hunt northern Minnesota. That's thick, as thick, if not thicker. And last year I tried the UP of Michigan. That's a little bit more open and more rolly hills. You could be successful in all areas. I have been in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and in Michigan I passed one that I came right up on, and I missed another one, so it can be done there as well. I don't know if there's a terrain that you can't do it on. It's just that some are better than others. I like hilly country. I like a rise in the land. I think it gives you an opportunity to close distance on a deer without them seeing you. when you're going down through valleys and come back up, especially when you're following one. That I think you could be more successful because you can close a lot of distance, and if they check up to see if you're coming, see if something's still following them, I think you have a better chance. When you come up to a rise, you have a little bit better visibility as well, and so that's what I would say would be my favorite, is the more rolly terrain. Believe it or not, I found it to be the most difficult in wide open terrain, wide open hardwoods. You would think I could see the deer forever out here. I'm going to catch this deer, but they have the ability to stay out far enough ahead of you and be able to pick you out before you pick them out, and they're always gone. So one thing I do if they're in the more open hardwoods is I'll push them really hard, because I don't expect I'm going to get a shot anyway. And I like to push them into a swamp, and then it's game on. If I could get them into the thick stuff where 30, 40-yard shots are max, I love that. I want them there. That's where I want to do my work. So if they want to run the hardwoods, I try to just get them out of there by pushing them as hard as I can. So I don't know if there's any place that you can't do it. It's just that some are better than others. When I pick up a track and I identified them, that's one I want to take, I first try to age it. And that is going to go by, if it froze that night, is that track froze? And if it was soft the day before, the evening before, did he make that track before it froze and it's nice and crisp, a real nice crisp imprint made in soft snow, then froze overnight? Then I know that it had to occur as the temperature was, before the temperature came down to the freezing point, so I know he's got to be way ahead of me. But look at the track and try to age the track.
Okay, he left some deer droppings here. What you can do, pick them up and squeeze them. And these are really froze hard. That means he's a long ways away yet. Or he could be close but bedded. Another thing you can do is check to see how froze the track is. That'll give you some indication too.
The only way you can get good at it is by doing it a lot. Look at tracks. If you see a track on your way into the morning hunt, really look at it. And on your way back out, look at it again and see how much it's changed. And take into account the weather that happened that night, the weather that's happening during the day. But you have to practice to get good at aging a track. And once I determine how far away I think he is, if I think he's quite a distance out in front of me, I push hard and fast. There's no reason not to. Chances are he could be 2 or 3 miles away. So why not just cover ground? I don't worry about making noise at that point. Again, he's probably not close. I waste a lot of time trying not to make any noise, so I might as well just go fast and don't worry about noise. If as I'm going the track freshens up, it tells me a lot. If he beds down and he gets back up, how much different is the track when he got up than the track coming into the bed? And that'll give you an idea again of how much time went by, how long he laid there, and then maybe how far he might be ahead of you. It's a guessing game because the track may be 8 hours old, but he might be 100 yards away and he might have been bedded down the whole time. So you guess, you're guessing at it. But the big key is when you're going after a track is watch what the deer track is telling you. If it's telling you he's going to bed up, that's the time when it's time to really check up, when it's time to go really slow. If you play the guessing game of, oh, that looks like a good bedding area, maybe he's there, and you slow up, you're wasting a lot of time. What does the track tell you? Is the track telling you that he might pick that spot to bed up? And typically what you're looking for is he'll be cutting country, fairly straight lines. All of a sudden he'll stop and he'll start feeding. He'll nibble on this and he'll wander over here and nibble on that. And typically when they feed up, they're going to bed up. Typically. Not always, but typically when they feed up, they're going to bed up. So that's the time when you really want to start slowing way down and really start paying attention to what's going on.
One of the neat things about tracking is you can see what the deer eat. Here they're feeding on a moss. It's called Old Man's Beard.
Any time on the track, always be left and right, looking left and right. You can get mesmerized by where the track is going in front of you, but it turns so often that if you're not watching left and right constantly, you're going to miss them. And when they bed up, they almost always hook. And I think they do that out of safety. They want to hook around and be able to position themselves to watch their backtrack. You know, so again, watching left and right is very important. But as far as looking to see if there's a bedding area, and well, I know that there's a bedding area. I bet you he went there. Don't play that game. Watch the track and read what the track is telling you, and you make your moves according to what the tracks are telling you. And I've done that already. I've tracked deer where they start to feed, and you're thinking, I got to slow down, and still taking them for miles. So that's not always the case either. But usually when they feed, they're going to lay down. Well, last year's buck, I went back into an area that I was fairly familiar with, and I hadn't been in for a few years, and I thought I'll go and check it out. And I was driving roads looking for tracks, and it was getting mid-morning already, and I was getting anxious to find a track, and I hadn't found a real decent track yet. And I come across one that came across the road that was nice, not a monster, not what I really want to take, but it was a nice track, and I thought I'll take it for a while and see what happens. And sometimes when you follow a track, he'll take you and you'll find a better track. And it's a learning process. You're learning the land as well. You're learning where they travel. And I thought, I'm not going to burn the day. I'm going to get on this track and take it. Well, he took me in a ways, and then all of a sudden he crossed some older tracks, and I noticed that there was a real nice buck in there. When there was another smaller deer that I thought was a doe, but the track was from the night before, and it was still frozen, and it was not as fresh. And I decided not to switch tracks, but to stay with the buck I was on, even though it was a bigger buck that I was passing. So I stayed with him, and he ended up making a big circle, probably about a half-mile diameter. And what I found out was he was actually scent checking that area, and he knew that buck and that doe was there somewhere, and that's what he was trying to determine where they were. And he ended up taking me right back to where they were, and there was one other buck involved in the mix as well, and the chase took place there. There was a big chase. There was tracks all over. It was a mess to figure out because it looked like there was 100 deer running there. I mean, there was tracks everywhere. And finally, after trying to sort it out, I found one decent track where it left the area. Actually, I found two, and I just pretty much figured they were both the same. I'll just take this one, and I took it. And I went about a quarter mile on that track, and I decided there's got to be a bigger one, and I don't see the doe. So I went back to where the chase scene was, and I made a big circle around the area again, and I found where the buck come out with the doe. And so I switched over to that one, and that's the one I took. And I took them about, probably close to a half a mile, and I jumped them up. And the doe came up first, which was nice because that gave me time to get ready. And she ran right by me, easy shooting, and just let her go. And of course the buck, when he got up, he made a huge wide circle. And I followed him for a long time. It was a little bit more open there. And at the last possible second, I just couldn't get the gun on him. At the last possible second, I squeezed off a shot, and I hit him, and I wounded him. And then it was an all-day chase. I chased him until dark, and at one point he was laying in a river, and I kicked him out of the river, missed him, and went back into the river again, and I lost him, and I called it a night. And then I went back the next day and brought another guy with me, and we kicked him up, and I missed him again. And he was so wore out that he didn't even want to climb a small hill, and the guy I was with had a clean shot, and he put the finishing shot on him. The 3.5-year-old was the first one I ever took tracking. It's kind of a unique story because it's not the typical what you would think of a tracking story. It was more, I tracked him to where he hooked up with a doe, and they started a chase, and they were circling and circling and circling, and instead of trying to figure it all out, I decided to stay put and watch for 1 hour. I gave myself, and then I was going to try to find out where they came out of that mess and take the track again if I could find it. But I thought they were probably right in the area yet because they were circling around and around and around in there, and as soon as I made the decision to stay put, here they came. And there was a doe, and then the 2 fawns were with her, which is kind of unusual, and the buck. And they came running by, and I pulled up and I hit him twice in the shoulder as he come running by. So it was a result of tracking got me to where he hooked up with this doe, and then my patience, I guess, deciding to wait and see what would happen since they were circling in there, that got me the deer. Trying to sort it out would have probably only pushed him out of the area. So I shot one in Minnesota. It was the last day of season, and at that point I was more concerned with just putting some meat in the freezer. I had a doe in heat, and 3 bucks were after her, and there was 1 dandy, and then the snow came, and it snowed so hard that it just started filling everything into where you couldn't really determine what track was what anymore. So I circled the area, and I picked 1 buck out of the 3 that had broke off, and I knew he wasn't a real big one, but it was the last day, and I tracked him for hard. I practically jogged after him for about a half a mile, and that was a case where he kind of hooked off to the side and found a patch, thicker patch, and laid down. And I had the wind in my favor. I actually could smell him before I came up on him, and I kicked him out.
Here's his track going into where he bedded down. I kind of suspected he was cutting country pretty fast, pretty straight lined, and then he decided to cut into some thick stuff, which was pretty characteristic of them going to bed up. They usually go through some thick stuff I think they kind of do that to warn themselves any impending danger coming. They can hear the brush cracking and so forth. You see, he went through some pretty nasty stuff here. And typical too, he kind of moved uphill to bed. There's his tracks going in, and there's his bed. You'll notice you can see the tarsal stain from his hind legs. That'll tell you it's a buck. Fun hunt. From here, he heard me coming and he jumped up and he circled around this way. And went around, and he was standing up in that area up in there when I caught him.
But because the wind was in my favor, he didn't know what I was. So he just did another hook and stood off on the side. And when I cleared the little patch to where he was laying in, I just scanned left and right, and I picked him out, standing there watching to see what was following. And I cleared the little patch to where he was laying in. I just scanned left and right, and I picked him out, standing there watching to see what was following, and I put a bullet in him.
Well, I got my last day buck tracking. Not a big one, but I don't mind. There he is. Very proud of this deer. Hard fought 2 weeks in the North Minnesota. Comes down to this, putting meat in the freezer. That's what it's about. I cut his track. I took him about a half a mile. I kicked him out of his bed, and he made a half a loop around, and I was really watching close, and by golly, I picked him up and I put him down. Very excited. Tracking. It's exciting. Tough. Let's see how many points this little bugger's got. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a double brow, 7, 8. Got myself a nice 8-pointer. Good meat for the freezer. Very excited. It's a fun hunt, tough hunt. Now the work begins. It's all uphill out of here.
A lot of people are concerned about tracking, especially in areas where there are some numbers of hunters, because they're afraid they're going to push their deer onto another hunter. It can happen. It hasn't happened to me yet, but it probably will. The first way I look at it is I'm not going to get the deer if I don't. So, and if I make somebody else successful, so be it. But timing, waiting until after opening weekend is a very smart thing to do. Most hunters are bait hunters in the north. They'll sit their baits the first weekend, morning, evening. Very few sit all day. The rest of the day you have the whole woods to yourself. Typically northern Wisconsin, once it gets past the opening weekend, you don't see much for people anymore. And the few that are there, or the ones that are there, are going in and out to a bait. And most of the deer that I follow avoid the baits anyway. They know where they are already. If you're tracking them, they're avoiding it anyway. They know their way around. They know how to avoid that. So though it can happen, it probably won't. And if you wait, your chances even get better of that not happening, of running into somebody. So I guess I don't worry about, other hunters being there. It's just the way it is. Again, Dan, when it comes to this, it's more along the lines of I can't create snow when I want it to be there.
Oh, I see. If it snowed, you better hunt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had last year was a good example of that. We got snow Saturday, opening day at midday. And that was the snow that I killed my deer on. We put them down on Wednesday. I shot them on Tuesday and then finished them off Wednesday morning. And though that's the worst time for me to be able to want to track, I went out right away Sunday and I took off on tracks. Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesday I shot that deer. So I hate to say, I don't really want to dissuade people from it. It's when it snows, when the conditions are right.
This is a doe where she peed. You can see her urine in the snow. And if you look, you can see all 4 of her feet. They bunch their hind legs up close to their front legs and they kind of squat back and pee. So if you're tracking, a deer and it does this, you'll know that you're chasing a doe.
I think a lot of people, including yourself, were thinking that, you know, that this is a very difficult method, or that it's almost impossible because of, again, your education on feeding and bedding, and that's where you do the most of your killing, is off a feeding bedding pattern. And the tracking, if I had to say what makes it possible to do it, is the fact that deer make mistakes. Even the big ones, even the old ones, make mistakes. And when you're tracking them, if fate steps in, when you step into the area where they are, you get a chance. A lot of times you don't. A lot of times you can chase a deer all day and you'll never get a chance at him. But fate can step in. I had one buck that had a doe and a fawn come by him, who I may even have pushed those deer by him, I don't know. But it brought him out of his bed, and he was so mesmerized with that doe and fawn that I walked right up to him, and he didn't even know I was there. And it was a distraction. Something caused, you know, that fate stepped in and helped me out. And I see that, I think, is why it works. You're not going to shoot one every time you do it, and you may go after 10, 20 of them and not have any success, but eventually you will. Eventually you're going to step onto the scene at a moment when he makes a mistake, and you're going to win, if you're watching, if you're paying attention. Which is another important thing with tracking, and that is you can't be intense all day or you'll burn yourself out, but if you're not watching all day, you'll miss that one opportunity of a whole day hunt. You have to be watching all the time. You have to be scanning all the time ahead. If you're watching the track, he isn't going to be standing in that track. He's out there somewhere. And if you're watching the track, it's going to be very difficult to kill him. You know, you have to be looking up. You have to be looking for him. Yeah, there's a lot of positives to tracking besides actually shooting a deer. That's the ultimate goal. The one thing, though, that since I've started tracking that I've learned is the information that I've learned about how big bucks travel an area, where they like to bed down, what they do on a daily basis, what they feed on, is by far more important than ever putting one on the wall. You get to see what foods they like to eat, how they like to use the land. You've read all the articles on what a deer is supposed to do, you know, how he's supposed to react in according to the wind, or how he'll travel country. But when you get on 10, 20, 30, 100 tracks, you start to learn what they really do, how they really traverse land, how they really get around, you know, and there's two different phases to that. How they do it when nothing's bothering them, when they're just going about their normal business, and then what they do when they're being pursued. You get to learn both sides of that. More of a pressured deer versus you know, a normal deer. And it's amazing. If a young man came to me and said, teach me how to hunt, I would tell him, follow 100 buck tracks and then come back to me. And then when he did, I'd say, you don't need to know anymore. You've learned it all now. Because he'll know what he can't learn anywhere else. He'll learn exactly where they go, what they do, what they eat, how they travel the land. He'll know more than 99% of the hunters out there. Huge, vast tracts of land would be optimal. You could take the track all day and never have to worry about running into no trespassing situation or private land. But I say any amount of land, it's possible to track a deer. Again, it's a tactic, and you have to use it when the tactic works well. Example would be a person owns 40 acres of land, private land, and there's private land all the way around. And he cuts a real big buck track coming into his land. And it's during rifle season, and he's interested in going on that track, but he says, if I walk in on that deer, I'm just going to chase it to the neighbor and he's going to kill it. Well, he might be right, but again, it's situational. Is it opening day? Or is it Wednesday of rifle season and there's probably nobody out there? If I own that 40-acre track, what I would do is I would circle my property, check to see if that deer came out. If he didn't come out, and it wasn't a real busy time where there were a lot of guys neighbors in the woods, I would come back to the start and I would take that track up. And knowing that he didn't come out of 40, I know I've got the rest of the day. I would just pick that track really, really slow and walk that track through. You know he's in there, he hasn't come out. So the size of the land may dictate why you or how you go about it, but it shouldn't limit you from tracking a deer. Any size land can be done. There's so much information that's relayed by following a track that if you follow a track far enough, you can learn so much about that deer that by the time you see it, you already know that deer real well. How wide is that track will determine how big of a chest that buck has on him. How long the gait is will tell you if he's a long-bodied or a short-bodied deer.
Okay, I found a nice track to take today. If you notice, he's got a nice spread between left and right steps, which I like to see. That shows me there's some body weight to him, some size. He's got a real nice big footprint. Finally got some decent snow conditions, and we got some nice wind today to keep the noise levels down when you're walking. And this is a good buck. So we're going to take this one and we're going to see where he leads us.
If he's comes upon a few trees and they're 20 inches apart and he decides to circle around those trees, you know he's wide. If he ducks underneath some small branches and he knocks the snow off only to a certain height, it can give you a really good estimate as to what his time length is even. So you can learn a lot about that deer. He'll reveal things about his body size and his rack size as you're following him. You may follow him a ways and he may duck through some area and knock only snow that's 14 inches wide, and you may decide that I don't want a deer that small, and you could back off at that point. He may have a nice track, but the sign may tell you that he doesn't have the rack.
Okay.
I shot a nice 10-pointer in Wisconsin on Thanksgiving Day. The weather forecast told me we were getting some new snow, so I went up on a Tuesday night, and then Wednesday I basically did a sweep of the area. We had snow on the ground, but it was crunchy and old, just to see what we had. Thursday morning I hunted a stand, and the snow started coming down, so I switched right over to my tracking gear, and I went to a swamp and just started picking my way through looking for a track. And I got lucky. The first track I came across was a real nice one, and he was actually paralleling me going the other direction, so he had, maybe had even walked by each other, I don't know. But I took the track, and it was fresh. I picked up some poop and I squeezed it, and it was soft yet, and I didn't think he was more than an hour ahead of me at best, and he ducked around some trees that were about 20 inches wide, so I knew he was a good one. He circled into a more, or I should say straight lined it into a more wide open area, which kind of surprised me, and I was happy to see that. And he crossed a wide open, stopped on the other side like they like to do, and looked back to check his back track, and he was happy that nothing was following him and went on his way. And surprising to me, he went a little ways further and just did a quick button hook and laid right down, and I wasn't ready for him to be there because he didn't show any signs of feeding up or anything. And I bumped him out of there, and he took off, and I just followed him through the brush, and when I got a chance I squeezed off one shot, and I hit him in the neck and brought him down, and it was a nice 10-pointer, about a 4-year-old buck. So that was a pretty nice deer, and pretty happy to get that one. They can leave an imprint in the snow when they're feeding. It's fairly rare, and once in a while they'll actually drop their head while they're sleeping and leave an imprint, but that again is fairly rare too. But it does happen, so watch for it. Usually if they're going to leave an imprint when they're feeding, it's because they came up along the side of a hill and they'll actually poke into it more than actually rotating their head down in. But just watching what they're willing to go through or what they go around with their rack, and then how much snow they knock off is usually a good indication as to width and tine length. And another thing you'll find too, a lot of times you'll see rubs. I've often come across rubs that they make while I'm tracking them. And you can get a little idea if there's junk on the rack by what the rub looks like. My definition is an oh my God track. When you look at it and you say, oh my God, that's a big one. That's what I like to find. And what I'm looking for is a track that's bigger than anything in that area, which changes from area to area that I track. And I like to see width between the right and left, because that tells me there's a broader shoulders on them. That means it's a bigger deer. And I also like to look at the length, and I like to see 2 feet. That's a pretty good stride. And if I find that really big one, then I like to take it, because I know he's a good deer, good bodied deer, and it's easier for me to stay on a track like that because there won't be another track like his. If you take a smaller track and he comes across any other deer, then you have to sort those out, and it's a lot harder to do that. Sometimes you get really crunchy snow conditions and it's pretty tough to track, pretty hard to get close enough for a shot without them hearing you and blowing out ahead of you. One tactic you can use during those type of conditions is to actually find a real decent buck and backtrack him instead, and just learn as much about him as you can, what he did that night, and maybe find out where he does some of his bedding. You can learn a lot about that particular deer. You won't kill him that day, but what you learn may kill him another day. Yeah, I hunt alone, I track alone. There could be some advantage to having a second guy. The second guy would be another set of eyes watching left and right while you're tracking. That could be extremely helpful if you have older snow and more tracks, because you spend more time trying to sort the track out. The second guy could be watching for the deer while you're trying to stay on them. It could be handy, but the second guy is also going to have more motion and more noise. So there's a plus and a minus to having a second guy. I would actually prefer to go alone, but 2 guys could have its advantages at times.
I think it would be pretty hard to pick the right partner. You gotta have somebody that's got the like mind and stuff.
Yeah, well, not only that, you got a guy with a gun behind you and a deer might jump up in front of you.
Better know him pretty well, huh?
Right, you better trust the guy behind you isn't going to get, isn't going to make a mistake. Though I normally find a track by traveling around with the vehicle looking for tracks and everything. Mm-hmm. If I get hard pressed, that's where I go. I'll jump out of the truck and I'll start walking. But I don't like to start walking until I find the deer. But if one of those days occur, I'll get out and I'll go to places where I know, to try to pick up a track. Mm-hmm. But, which is weird for me. It seems like every time I find a decent buck up north, he's dead the next year. He's gone. It's just pathetic. I just can't stay on a deer from year to year up there. But I will go back and look for him on the snow.
Okay.
Hoping that I can catch that deer that I chased last year. Matter of fact, I found one dead up in Minnesota that I think was the one I was after the year before, and something killed it, and I found it dead, and I didn't find it. I couldn't find his tracks that year again. So I have a feeling that he was probably the one. He was a nice buck too. Almost all the time when you're tracking a deer and he's going to bed up, he will button hook off left or right. Many times he'll even go button hook to an elevation. So when you're tracking, you have to be watching at that time. If you see that he's probably going to bed up, you have to be looking left and right, because he likes to button hook off to the side. And if I had to pick one side to focus on, I'd look for the elevation.
I hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit the like and subscribe. Leave a comment if you would. It's all appreciated. Thank you, and we'll see you again.